Hi, I'm Tyson Franklin, and welcome back to this week's episode of Podiatry Marketing. With me, as usual, is Big Jim Mack. How are you doing today, Jim?
Tyson, I'm doing well. Just had a nice little long weekend here, and no, just things are good.
I'm glad I finally remember the name of our show.
The third time's a charm, right?
Third time lucky, and I nailed it. When you said, I said, oh, geez, I keep forgetting the name of the show. You said, call it whatever you want. And I was going to make up some really crazy name, and people listening to it would have gone, what? Are we on the wrong podcast? I mean,
Yeah,
Jim's Floral Expo podcast.
they would have been checking their podcast player and just say, "What's going on here?" I thought this was the Podiatry Marketing podcast. So
Yeah,
yes,
I have done that every now and then when you think you've clicked on something and it goes on to something else. And next thing you're listening to it and you go, what are they doing? And you think I must just be an ad, and then you realize, no, wrong podcast.
well, it's one of those things too. It's one of those things too where we've said the intro so many times that if you really stop to think about it, like it's a little bit harder as opposed to just kind of doing it naturally. So.
I know. Okay, so let's dive in to today's exciting topic of.
So today we're going to talk about the evolution of AI images. I think we've had quite a number of shows talking about more kind of the text-based opportunities that are available with AI, but today we're going to dive in a little bit about what's currently available when you're asking ChatGPT or some of these different large language models to make you some images, because it definitely is something that has been improving over time. It's not, it's something that's gradually getting better, but just to understand some of the basics and then kind of where this stuff is going.
Yeah, I created one today, and there was 4 of us in this picture, and I said, but we're all quite a distance away from each other. I thought, instead of editing myself, I'll just put it into this program. Can you take the 4 images and create a new image with the 4 of us together, like we're all together? And the other 3 actually looked like the people. I was really impressed with how good they looked. I looked like, I don't know, I was the town drunk or something. I looked and I said, seriously, that's how you see me. And I'm sure if other people looked at it, they'd probably say, oh, Tyson, you look fine. And I look like the town drunk. So maybe it's just in the eye of the beholder. But yeah, I wasn't really impressed. I didn't use it. But it has
Yeah,
gotten
like I
better.
said, no, it's definitely gotten better, but it's got a long way to go with certain aspects of things. I think if anyone here has seen, there's kind of a famous video of Will Smith, the actor, trying to eat spaghetti. And that, like, there's one that was made by AI, like I think 6 or 7 years ago, and it just looks crazy. It looks insane. But there's one now that you look at the photos, you look at the video of it, and it just looks like Will Smith eating spaghetti. That being said, obviously we're looking for ways to highlight your practice, highlight what you want to do. So when we talk about these AI image generators, we're talking things like what's called DALL-E, which is ChatGPT's model they use. There's something called MidJourney, Adobe, who makes Photoshop and some other, the video editing software that Tyson uses. They have something called Firefly, where you can kind of create almost, any image just by using a text prompt. So, it's something that can be really, really helpful potentially in the future. But right now, it's still kind of getting its sea legs, I would say. I would say that one of the examples of sometimes people will use it for is sometimes like a social media, like a profile shot.
Yeah.
You can feed in, you can give these different tools. Maybe you've had a photo shoot, recently, or you've had photos in the past, or you take photos of yourself. You can load up some of these images into these different models, and it can do a pretty good job with headshots. It gets a little bit more complicated with other types of things, but like I said, it's still pretty early days as far as what these things can do.
Yeah, well, I have used the image creators on vidIQ to create thumbnails on some of the videos.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's been really good. It's come up with something I've gone, that is spectacular. And other times I've gone, just missed the mark, doesn't it? I can't get it to do what I want to do, because it might be just whatever the topic is that I've shot the video on. I can't explain what it is that I'm trying to see. So it doesn't always work. But I saw one only yesterday too, and it was a video, and they were showing how you put all these images of yourself up there, like 15 different angles, then put
Yeah.
it up there. Then it showed some of the images and video that it created, and I was like, wow, I wouldn't have picked it.
Yeah, definitely the photorealism or the kind of I think it's still pretty easy to tell what's an AI image versus like a photograph of a human or of a scene. It's getting better and better at that, but I think there's some real opportunities more with creating diagrams and some types of illustrations. That's probably where it functions the best.
Mm,
If you have a flow chart, maybe you want to have a flow chart or something created that's mostly text with maybe some symbols. It's going to do a really, really good job with that. And obviously, you still have to be the editor. You need to make sure that it's, the spelling is correct and those kinds of things. So sometimes, even if, like, for example, I was trying to make a logo for my kids' soccer jersey, like they're having little teams for a tournament. And it did an amazing job of taking the things I had written for it to do. But then it went and spelled the team's name with the team's name was the Blue Moons, and it
yeah.
had 3 O's instead of 2. And it did a great job on the kind of artistic with the kind of the drawing it used. Everything looked pretty good in proportion, but then it had 3 O's. So it's something, like I said, you still need to make sure that you are the editor there, and you're not just kind of letting it run wild.
Yeah, I did one on chat over the last 2 weeks. And one of them was an article I wrote about Starbucks, and it was like how Starbucks have changed the coffee industry. And so I went to chat and said, "Can you do me up an image that would depict someone standing behind a counter serving someone Starbucks coffee?" I was really impressed with what it gave me. I went, "That's great," and I ended up using it. Then I asked it to do another one from one of my podiatry episodes from the podcast. And said, "Can you highlight this and turn it into like an infographic?" And I just shook my head going, why? Why would you spell podiatry wrong? The person's name was wrong. There were so many spelling mistakes through it, and it just totally missed the mark. I couldn't use it. It was a useless image.
Yeah, it's just crazy. Sometimes it can do a good job, and other times it's totally useless. But I think the real goal of this in the future is that, if you said if you upload 5 images of yourself and you want to, maybe potentially make images for your website, for your marketing, for, kind of the ability to kind of show you treating your ideal patient, and hopefully in a couple of years from now, that's something you'll be able to do because it just saves you time from having to hire a photographer, having to bring them into the clinic, having to take shots. But, I
Mm.
think authentic images are still obviously hugely important for all those different types of channels. But I guess the dream is that sometime in the future that these kind of AI photo models will either replace that or make it very easy to edit some of those images.
Yeah, I think at the moment the biggest problem is when I see an image, if it's too perfect, the skin on the person is just too perfect, and the hair's perfect. That I think over time it will start picking up on your blemishes, and it will actually be including that instead of just sort of skimming over it.
No, definitely. I think it's gonna be much better as time goes on with those types of specific details.
So, what sort of applications do you think about that people should be using this?
Yeah, I think there's some really specific ones that people should be considering. Like I talked about, it might be a little bit early, but there's definitely some ways you can get at least brainstorm ideas about how to promote specific types of services, whether it be on Google Business posts or social media posts. Sometimes it can give you an idea about a layout. Sometimes you're busy being a podiatrist, you're maybe not the best kind of graphic designer, but you can sometimes tell. Chat GPT or one of these image models about, you'd like to create a business card or you'd like to create a logo. It can maybe get you to a point where, maybe it's not ready to go onto your social or ready to make a business card with, but it's much, much better to give a designer or a photographer or someone that can make some of these things with you a better visualization because then they can more kind of execute on more of what you're trying to go after as opposed to kind of like trying to pull stuff from thin air. It kind of gives a way to kind of bridge a gap between yourself and maybe someone that's helping create some of your marketing collateral for you.
Yeah, I think that's really important because I know I use a graphic designer a lot, and when her and I had just been like brainstorming ideas, I have this image in my head of what I want. And then sometimes it takes a while for her to get something that I'm really happy with. But I know now I could sit there with some of these programs and just be banging the ideas at them and getting something that's visual that then when I go to her, I'm saving a lot less time, speeds up that whole process.
No, absolutely. You're saving time and you're saving money by having kind of an iteration of it, and they're not having to like spend hours and the back and forth of like, is this what you want? Is this what looking good? People are busy, right? So you're doing a lot of these things async, and if you can provide them, get it 80% of the way there for them, and say this is kind of the idea that I have, and let them kind of do the polishing as opposed to having them create it from scratch is a huge opportunity.
So, but where you got any specific thoughts on where they should, well, where they could be using it?
Yeah, I think you can utilize it. Like I talked about, maybe you're creating some different things on social. Maybe it's around community events or seasonal campaigns. It's a way to kind of like just get some basic templates so that are a little bit more original than maybe some generic stuff you'd find in different, photo editors or other types of software. Also, if you're looking to, create blog posts, it's a good way to potentially, I would say, probably stay away from the photorealistic stuff right now, but you can create kind of better kind of banner headlines or big kind of banner images that go along with your blog post. Like I said, also sometimes you can make relatively good flow charts or definitions or ways as far as kind of making that blog post look a little bit more engaging than just something that's a complete wall of small 12 point written font. So I think that's an important component. Then maybe it's something like you said, you can develop flyers, handouts. It's something you can create, maybe some images for, a slideshow or a video that's running in your office. There's some different kind of opportunities to use it in that capacity.
Well, I suppose if everyone just thinks about how they currently use images, and there'll be some good examples like doing a flyer or doing something visually to play on a TV screen in your clinic. If they think of all the places where they're using it now, then they're all the places where you could use AI to give themselves a hand.
No, absolutely. And I think kind of jumping into taking off of that point is that I would say that, what's coming up next is that you're really looking for ways to kind of customize things. We're kind of big fans here on the podcast of don't use stock images, don't have the top 50 diagnoses, top 50 treatments. Hopefully some of these tools will help us kind of create more patient-centered visuals. It's really, really important because, people can go anywhere. And if you look like everybody else and you don't set yourself apart from someone, utilizing visual tools like this, they're gonna, they don't see why they should go to you. So, whether it's creating different types of flyers and things like that, or maybe it's personalized diagrams based on kind of patient scans. Maybe this is something that can be utilized in the future to help kind of educate patients as well.
So what's coming up? What's next, do you think?
Yeah, I think there's also an opportunity kind of for some customization that when it comes to maybe even side by side visuals, right? I think it's still not this type of stuff is not currently integrated into your EMR or to the software you're using in your practice on a daily basis. But I can see where maybe a scan of the foot will help. The actual scan of your foot can be compared to side by side to other, kind of standard, what other people's feet look like, or maybe a pre and a post op opportunity to kind of get general sense of, if you do have a bunion surgery, here's the potential for what the correction could look like. So people have a better understanding of what to expect. Maybe even show something like the surgical wound, superimposed over your actual foot. So you can get a general sense of like what you're going to be expected to do. And maybe it can help a little bit with patient compliance by having some of these visualization tools kind of baked into some of the software we use these days.
Which would be a little bit better than just a before and after photos of other people's feet. So what you're saying is they then take a photo of their foot and say, this is what your foot will look like after the surgery, but this is what it might look like a week later, 2 weeks later, a month later, and 6 months later.
Yeah, I think it can make it a little bit more personalized, right? I think sometimes, like you said, I think you have to kind of make sure that you're letting them know this is like an estimation of what's going to look like. Because if it's, if someone is a super perfectionist and like you're, a millimeter or 2 millimeters off of what that initial, maybe AI generated image showed, maybe it's something that they wouldn't be so excited about. So you have to be kind of temper expectations. But I think it is an opportunity, like you said, if it is personal to their foot, or that's what it's going to look like generally in a week after, 2 weeks after, 1 month after, giving them realistic expectations. Because like you said, the before and after doesn't show that time when the foot is, swollen, bruised,
Mm.
potentially. There's they have a surgical wound, there's stitches there. So if there's a way to kind of really make that more real for the patient to know what they're getting themselves into, they'll be better informed and probably have a better course of treatment. And you'll have maybe less phone calls, less concerns, coming into the clinic, when someone sees that, oh, there's, blood on the dressing or something like that. It feels more real to them when it's their own foot.
Yeah, well, it makes sense because, like I said early on, sometimes I'll show the before and the after. And that photo might be 6 or 12 months later, but there's this transition period. I can understand patients, especially if they've had surgery in their feet. If 3 weeks later they're looking at it and it's painful and it's swollen and it's a bit discolored, then they sort of go, well, this is not what they showed me in the images. Whereas if you got the AI images saying this is the progression as it goes through, and I assume with the AI too, it'll be able, if you give it enough information, it will then be able to replicate that with different patients based on age, gender, activities, and what their specific problem was.
No, absolutely. I think like you said, is doing this as well gives you an opportunity to do those before and afters. But when it's more personalized to the patient, they're going to be probably take a bigger role in their treatment. And it's one of those things where podiatrists or the people doing bunion surgeries, they see those things all the time. But for the person that underwent the surgery, this is the one time or maybe the first time they've had this done, and it can seem like the end of the world, or they feel what they don't know can kind of overwhelm them sometimes. But if they have a better idea going into the sequence, the surgery, and then the recovery sequence, they're going to be much better informed, so they can be better patients for the clinics as well.
Okay, what about pitfalls of using this sort of technology? There's got to be at least one.
Yeah, there's a few. I think we talked about one here, just that last section about patient expectations. Like these are some of these tools, especially if you're using to kind of estimate, a surgical result or swelling, is you have to kind of temper patient expectations because it's not, nothing turns out exactly as we plan. So that's really, really important. I think it's also important to know that currently, especially with the kind of more photorealistic images that these different language models create, is that Google knows what's real and what's not real. They have abilities with the way they crawl websites. So if you're just blasting tons of AI generated content on your website, that's not really recommended right now. So as much as I think this is maybe kind of where things are going, it's really, really important to note that Google does prioritize and give kind of better rankings to people that have real images, real humans, real, pictures of you kind of taking care of your ideal patient. So I would say that, while it's pretty exciting, it is one of those things too, where, it makes mistakes, sometimes, especially in the early days, like if you check out a foot or a hand, or even a face, there's little things that if you're just scanning, you're going to miss. So, you want to make sure that you're detecting these images correctly and kind of reviewing them. But also, like I said, don't use that many of them right now, because Google definitely kind of will downrank your website a little bit if you have too many of these images floating around it.
Well, I have seen some websites where they're definitely using AI images, and it looks lazy sometimes because you can spot the flaws. And I'm not talking the simple things like 6 toes or 6 fingers or 7 fingers or a spelling mistake, but yeah, it's just not. That AI generated straight away going, okay, so they've cut a few corners, which is fine because a lot of people are using it.
Sure.
But if they cut corners and then also don't review the work that's being created, then to me, that makes you look lazy. So I don't care how much people use AI, but you've got to be working with it.
No, you got to be working with it, and you need to understand what Google's gonna, how they're gonna rank things. And right now, I said like it's mostly kind of giving a higher priority to real photos. So don't be blasting it too much in some of your channels where Google can have an impact.
Yeah, well, I use, like I said before, I've used the images, and the first thing I'm checking on is if there's any spelling in the image, the fingers, just the things that are most common. But then I don't use it straight away. I'll put it aside and I'll come back to it the next day with a fresh set of eyes. And it's surprising sometimes you'll pick something up that you don't see when you're in a bit of a hurry. So I think if people are going to use images this way, don't be in a hurry to use them, or have somebody else look at them to give you a different perspective.
No, absolutely. And I think that kind of like dovetails really nicely into the last point. And that's that I think at this point in time, AI image generation is really more of a supportive role than it is kind of like the final kind of content that you should put onto a lot of your clinic websites. A little bit of social here and there is going to be fine. Thumbnail images like you're using it for, Tyson, I think is good, but it's not time to replace all of your regular imagery with this AI generated stuff, because it's going to help support your strategy, but it shouldn't be the main way to create these kind of photorealistic images of the type of patients you want to treat. Because like I mentioned, it can be a great way to show a graphic designer or photographer, the kind of images you maybe want to have on your website. Like maybe it's, show a doctor taking care of a specific type of patient, and then they have that from a specific angle. You can type that into ChatGPT and it can create that angle you want the photographer to take. So it can definitely help you communicate what your needs are when it comes to content with a graphic designer or photographer. But at this point in time, I would rely more on, like I said, using it as a tool to have that kind of content created and not to be the end result. Because like I said, there's definitely ways it can be used. It can help, enhance patient education. Like I said, it helps you kind of illustrate like the type of patient experience people can, but it's still very, very early days. So to make sure that you're ranking well with SEO and those things, use real images still. But I can see in the future where if it gets good enough, and Google kind of gradually relaxes their policies in the future, that this could be a really cost-effective tool for content generation. But right now, it's a better tool for content planning.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I personally just think if you've got the ability to take a real photo, take a real photo. But I think some people, they just don't think. And I remember talking to a podiatrist years ago who'd been in the profession for a long time, and he had colleagues who'd been in 20 or 30 years, and they were going to do a talk, and they would call him and say, "You wouldn't happen to have a photo on this, would you?" And he would go, "Seriously, you've been in the profession for 25 years and you have not collected photos." So I think it's one of those things. People, they've got their smartphones, the camera on the smartphones are great. Just keep snapping photos. And even if you don't necessarily use that photo, you might be able to use that photo with AI and create something great. But I think a real photo is always going to be better than some of the AI creates.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's an interesting tool, and maybe in the future it's going to get better. But for photorealistic, for patient photos, for things on your website, definitely keep it real for the time being.
Yeah, unless you, like you said, I used it to create thumbnails sometimes. I don't expect you to be able to look at that thumbnail or whatever and sort of go, "Oh, that's a fake image." Of course, it's a fake image. It's
Right.
pretty obvious because what I'm talking about sort of relates to that image. You couldn't really get just a photograph to do that.
That makes sense.
So, anything else on this before we finish off?
No, I think it's just a space for people to be aware of. Like I said, I think I've kind of seen an overproduction, I think, from some, not necessarily podiatry clinics, but I think people are so amped up on AI that they're cranking out a lot of content when it comes to even visual content these days. So it definitely is an area that's growing. So having a general idea about what it is and how it could potentially benefit clinics in the future is helpful. But like I said, you got to keep it real with the real photos for the time being, especially on your website and Google properties, and you'll continue to succeed and attract those right fit patients to your practice.
And if you've never used AI to help create an image, go and have a play with it. Even if you're not using it, I think you need to be using this technology just to see its capabilities, even if you choose not to use the image in the long term.
And one of the cheat codes too of creating images on AI or some of these different tools is that you create the prompts and then have the AI help you create a better prompt. If you don't really know, you have a general sense of how you want something to look, you can ask the ChatGPT or one of these large language models to help you make a better prompt to help improve the image you create. So yeah, that's great advice, Tyson. I think definitely, like I said, we'll keep an eye on this space to let our audience know about how things are moving. But no, it was a fun talking to you about this one today.
Okay, well, I look forward to talking again next week.
Sounds great, Tyson.
Okay, see you. Bye.